Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers. We're here to talk Seahawks football. We've got our continuing series on draft prospects, and we're to the tight end position group this week. Lots to talk about. It's a good class. I think Seattle's going to be active in looking for a tight end in either the draft or in free agency. So it's going to be an interesting offseason. Noah Fant's out there with a big cap number. They've got some opportunity there to either rework that deal or move on from Noah Fant, which would mean that we would need to replace Noah Fant. That's certainly a possibility, but also he's kind of a nice toy for Klint Kubiak to be able to have in that offense. They're clearly going to need two tight ends with Klint Kubiak, since he runs a lot of 12 personnel, two tight ends on the field. Welcome in, Keith. Let's talk about this class.
Yeah. It's tight ends. It's not everyone's necessarily favorite position to talk about, but honestly, this is an important position group for Seattle. You've got Barnes, who turned out to be really solid last year, one of the better rookies of that class. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head with Fant. Like, that cap number is huge, and Seattle's currently over the cap. And so if they can't get that negotiated down, then he's gone. And that leaves them with one tight end on the roster. And so this is an important position group for Seattle, because getting a guy out of the draft gives you a hopefully a solid player, but at a tiny contract, and they need that.
No, I agree with almost everything you said, except for the part where if they can't rework his deal, he's gone. I'm not so sure. I mean, yes, it is a $9 million cap number, unguaranteed portion of it. They can move off of that number. That's certainly, when you take a look at our cap situation, we need to generate about $50 to $70 million in cap, probably closer to 70 by the time, you adjust for rookie contracts and having money on the books going into the season and so forth. That's a big number. We've shown in the past that we can get there moving around a bunch of contracts, cutting some players, doing something with Geno Smith's contract, etc. Noah Fant was part of that conversation, and yes, Noah Fant's got a number there where you can either add a couple years, adjust, make the cap number in 2025 much smaller, or move on from him. Now, the moving on from him part for me is hard, because he does present a skill set that I think both of us would probably agree that, based on just his skill set, he's been underutilized so far in Seattle schemes, whether that's under Shane Waldron or whether that was under Grubb last year. 45 catches, hardly any touchdowns in the last couple of years. A big red zone guy, a move tight end, a receiving tight end, quote unquote, former first round draft pick. You want him to be able to have in this offense 75 opportunities,
Yeah.
but that also takes away from opportunities. And there were reasons too, I think, that was underutilized, is that the whole offense was kind of screwed up. The red zone opportunities were limited. The third down opportunities and conversion rates were low. The running game was limited. So all in all, it didn't present well for utilization of tight ends. Now, Barner came on and had a decent rookie season, but Fant was the guy you were looking at to extend the field, create some mismatches against, safeties and linebackers, and it just didn't happen. So how do you view Noah Fant moving forward? Ideally, would you like to retain him? How would they use him in Klint Kubiak's system? And if we did move on, what are the other options out there?
Well, I view him as a guy that you'd want, because he is another weapon. You've got your top two wide receivers, and I'm assuming that Tyler Lockett and that salary are not with the team anymore. So you got your top two wide receivers, and you don't have a lot behind them. As far as talent. And so you need more weapons. You need more guys that can get open, and you need guys that can get open in different ways, give you some versatility in terms of who who you're strong against in terms of matchups. And Fant's one of those guys that can do that for you. He moves really well for a guy his size. He can run away from um, middle linebackers, but he's too big for a cornerback, so you have to commit a safety to him. Um, and it's mismatch stuff, but his this is a team that they need cap space, and there's only so many contracts that can be messed with to generate that cap space.
No, I would
Um,
say if Grubb was coming back and they were going to utilize him for 45 catches again, 400 yards, one touchdown, it doesn't make sense to keep him at that number. Now, with the new situation and potentially using a tight end correctly in an offense where he would again be potentially the number one tight end target as far as a receiving kind of a guy, you rethink that, and it
yeah, but
potentially becomes a better value. Hold, one more second. The issue that I have, I think that Klint Kubiak has, and stated in his recent press conference, was that, listen, if you're going to be a tight end in this offense, you better block. You better be able to block. You got to do everything well. Kind of
hmm
like Barner ended up being last year. Good inline guy, but also he gave you some plus stuff out in route running and catching the ball and moving the chains. I think there's a part of me that thinks, well, he was talking to Noah Fant as like, you better show up ready to block this, change your mentality a little bit, because we're going to need you to do that if you're going to be on the team. Versus, I think we're going to move on from Noah Fant and we're going to find a more ideal fit in this scheme.
yeah, and I also think that they need the cap space, and we went through the salary cap show. There's only like 10 contracts that have enough um cap relief built into them, those are the ones where all the cap space has to come from, and he's one of them. And can you replace his production with the $9 million that you would get by cutting him, and um, or actually less than that, so you could actually use some of that elsewhere? I think you can, and I think there's some um, nice players in this draft that aren't first round picks, that could come in and do that for you. And so that's why I think if they can't get that number down, then I just don't see how you keep him and still generate the cap you need.
The only way
Unless
that I
unless
think
there's
you
a Geno Smith like thing coming, and I'm not going to predict that until it happens. So
The only positive thing about staying on his number and letting him play out a deal is that you let him play out a deal and you get that full cap relief in 2026, keep Noah Fant on the team. I would do that in a normal situation if cap wasn't an issue. Um, and that seems to be the less likely of the three options. You've got cut him, claim the full cap relief. You've got a rework situation, which you're you're locking yourself up in 2026 and beyond with a player that you may not feel is the best fit in your scheme. Or C, you let him play out a deal. And I'm
mhm.
not sure which is the most likely thing, but I know something's got to give there. So
In a normal year where Seattle is goes into the off season, under the cap, and needing to, clear about $30 million to put you where you want to be, then I would say they keep him. But this isn't a normal year. They went into the off season 24 million over the cap. And so that's an extra, 24 million that you've got to clear, more than in a typical off season, at least.
so based on the idea that in Klint Kubiak's system, the first or second tight end in this system, they're almost ubiquitous as far as how they're used. Like you're going to use both of them a lot.
A
It's like
lot.
having two starting tight ends.
Mm-hmm.
Based on that, if they decide to move off Noah Fant because he's just not going to be capable enough in the blocking to be able to be viable in his system, so they haven't seen enough over the years as a receiving only tight end to be able to justify his position on the roster. Does it make more sense for them to go look in free agency for a player that has guaranteed productivity in the NFL, can give you at least a floor at the position group before the draft?
I think it makes sense for them to do both. I mean, you want three tight ends on your roster, because you're gonna have two on the field and guys get hurt, and so to go get um, a free agent that you can plug in and do stuff with would be great, and to have another young player on a rookie contract that you can develop, I think would also be great. So, um, yeah, there's lots of different ways that you could attack this, but I think that if they move on from Fant, they're really looking at both.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, there's some players out there too. They're going to come at an expense, but I think you can get one, like you said earlier. I think you could get one that's in the $3 to $5 million range, as opposed to the $9 to $10 million cap range that Noah Fant's in. Somebody that's going to
Hmm.
give you both, a lot of ability. Like Juwan Johnson, for example, from New Orleans, is a prime example of what we're talking about here. He's got time in Klint Kubiak's system directly, and is an unrestricted free agent. And last year he made $6 million. And he's
Hmm.
28, 29 years old. He's probably going to be in that range. Might be a little rich. I don't know. But if you can save $3 or $4 million on your previous number and get better production and a better scheme fit, maybe they decide to go in that direction. So that to me wouldn't be surprising at all, and possibly a viable path forward so that you can secure that position prior to the draft, and then draft a guy, a mid-round guy. We talk about a lot of them because there's some really good prospect. I like this draft, Keith, for tight ends. It's not, there's a couple of guys in the first round. We can talk about those guys, even though it's unlikely Seattle will move on that. But there's a lot of guys between the end of round 2 and round 4 or 5 where you like to get that positional value out of the draft that would fit what Seattle's trying to do, I think.
Yeah. Um, I mean, it's there's some nice players in this draft. It's not the it's not the deepest draft in terms of the number of people, um, but it's still a good group. Like it's pretty deep, in the middle rounds, and then I think the talent level falls off. Um, but yeah, it's like there's a couple players at the top, and I'm less sold on them than you, I believe. Um,
I'm not
and
necessarily sold on them, but they are definitely first round type talent guys. I mean, let's talk about them.
yeah, let's jump straight into there. The
Yeah.
first one's Tyler Warren, and 6'6", 4.6840. The guy is a good receiver, dynamic, does a lot of cool things that way, but also is strong as a blocker. Gets in and is not afraid of the dirty work. So
And he's a
definitely,
great player. Like if you watch him on tape, it's like he's definitely got the upside of Gronkowski. I think is a good comp for him. A player that's just a kind of a warrior mentality, is going to hit you after he gets the ball. He's going to stretch for extra yards. He's got that height and weight, almost 260 pounds, real decent speed for a tight end that size. All around, just a great prospect. I really loved watching him play. Just the awareness and the mismatches that he presents. I mean, I'd love Seattle to have the luxury of having a couple first round picks, and you go in and you get a playmaker that's going to be on your team for 8 years, and he's going to be a threat no matter which team you're going to play against. I we've never had a weapon like that, I think,
Not
on
at tight
Seattle's
end.
roster.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it'd be a cool toy, right? It'd be a very cool toy. And it would tilt the field. Like these are things that John Schneider would fall in love with. It's just if he's sitting there at 18
He's a
and
luxury.
you've got a pass rusher there and you've got an offensive lineman that you really like and potentially you're in the market for one of those middle tier quarterbacks that is pushed into the first round. Do you draft Tyler Warren or do you draft another guy? So
Yeah. See,
that's the deal.
spending in, the 18th overall pick on a tight end is a luxury. It's one of those things that you do when your roster is,
After you win the
um,
Super Bowl. It's what do you do?
well,
What do you yeah, right?
yeah, when your roster is kind of loaded and you can, you don't really have major needs. Or if your roster is empty and you're stockpiling talent, knowing that okay, you're still missing your quarterback, but you're not in a position to get one this year, you can load your roster up and then get your quarterback next year. If you're one of those teams, those are the ones that go after tight end. And I think also you got to look at like Tyler Warren is a really nice tight end. He's gonna be, I think he's gonna be a really good player at the next level. But the guys that go early round one are guys with really special athletic traits. You know, Kyle Pitts and that crazy speed for a guy his size. Um, or Brock Bowers, who's just like an insane athlete in all around in terms of everything. Um, like those are the guys that go early in round one. Tight ends, besides just really unique athletic trait guys, go later round one. And that's why I think that I've seen Tyler Warren as like a top 10 pick, and I don't see that. I see a guy that's going to go 15, 18, somewhere in that range. Um,
I think Tyler
and
Warren as a big board prospect, which means you're considering all prospects and all talents regardless of position group. I think he's a top 10 guy.
see, I don't. But part of it comes down to positional value, and I just he's a guy who can be really good, um, and but I don't think he has that special athletic trait. Like he's um, a slightly slower George Kittle. I mean, Kittle was a fourth round pick, so um,
Yeah, I don't.
I mean he's a lot more polished than Kittle was coming out. But as far
yes.
as like where the expectation of who he's going to be in the NFL, like I think that's a great comp is that
Hmm.
I mean Kittle is an all-around player, does everything well, um, very difficult to cover, creates mismatches. I know he like the last couple of years he's had gotten banged up a little bit, but and so his production hasn't been there. But go watch him on the field. He hurts defenses and all of that. But um,
Yeah, he's a great inline blocker too.
yeah,
Willing inline blocker. So let's talk
so
about Colston Loveland. He's the other guy that I think is going to be a first round guy. In fact, there are some guys that have Loveland over Tyler Warren. I think they are one too. Really close, depending on what you're looking for. This guy is more of a receiving threat, a little bit. Well, they're both receiving threats, but
hmm
this guy's not going to give you as much in line to block. He's certainly got the ability. He wants to, but he's just not really good at it yet, technique wise. Um, but he's kind of a nasty route runner, finishes really well, punishes defenders. Nice mismatch in that way. So I like him. Again, it's one of those things where Seattle's just probably not going to take one in the first round. I'd be shocked. I'd be shocked. And so would
hmm
everyone else. Um, so I don't want to spend too much time on him. I just, you got to talk about the guys, and he's definitely one of them.
yeah.
I like his upside. I think he's going to be a great tight end in the league.
He's more of a Jimmy Graham style tight end, a guy that is going to be super productive in the passing game, essentially a wide receiver.
Works out of the
Um,
slot a lot. Yeah.
yeah, um, and but his his blocking is suspect, but he's so good in the passing game, like finding ways to uh, cover him is going to be a challenge. And so, yeah, I mean, he's a guy that again, I think he's kind of a luxury pick for, some teams, and Seattle's probably not one of them.
So another kind of weird prospect that I saw at the Senior Bowl and didn't really care for it was Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green, 6'4", 230 pounds, a little light, but runs a 4.62, which is great, but he's got below average length for the position. So what is he exactly? Now, the only thing that makes me talk about him at all in this conversation is the idea that we also need kind of a fullback in this scheme. In fact, Klint Kubiak came out and said, I want a fullback. We're going to have a fullback in this
Mm-hmm.
scheme. This is a player that could kind of do both. He could be line up all over the field for you as far as schematically, but also come into the backfield and lead block on certain situations. But I don't like the length. He's
Yeah.
short armed. He's just not that tall to overcompensate for that. So his wingspan's still under 80. On a tight end, I think you want somebody 80 plus wingspan so you can high point the ball, create mismatches on the defense and so forth. So what is your feeling on this prospect?
Well, I think that he's a guy that at it currently is kind of overrated on big boards, and you're going to see him drop. Um, and
Agreed.
he's a guy that you know I don't see him as a good blocking tight end, and I don't see. Um, I mean, he'll get open and he'll make some plays and all of that, but
But he's
I don't
230
see him.
pounds. He's
Yeah,
not going to overwhelm defensive ends that are 200, 60 to 85.
yeah. And so you look at, you know, DK Metcalf is bigger than him, and he's a wide receiver. So why, you're looking at a tight end who doesn't block well and
Yeah, who
isn't,
has almost 4.7 speed, right? DK
yeah,
Metcalf's
4-2.
4.3.
And so yeah, I mean you're totally in a situation like what does he do well? There's a the tape shows he does nothing badly. I mean, he's not a great blocker, but even then he's very willing and puts his body in there and works really hard. But so he doesn't do anything badly, but what does he do well? He
Well, he
runs
does.
some
He
decent
receives the
routes.
ball really well. Like
He
he's got
runs some
really
decent
nice soft
routes.
hands,
Yeah.
yards after the catch. His body type at the Senior Bowl threw me off. It's like he's
Hmm.
just very stocky looking.
He did
Um,
not stand out at the Senior Bowl, whereas the next guy that we're going to talk about absolutely did.
yeah.
Um,
No, totally. Are you talking about
so
Elijah Aurora?
yeah.
Yeah. Now, the only thing about him is the injury history, and we can talk about that, but everything else is upside. Like as far as a receiving tight end. Now, he's not going to get in line and block for you really well right out of the gate. Like he's going to have to work on that, and you're going to have to go through the process and understand if he's a guy that's willing to do that and so forth. But yeah, talk about the athletic upside, just the sheer mismatch opportunities with him as a receiver. Yeah, like fun prospect.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that came in at the Senior Bowl and stood out and um, routinely got open, routinely made plays, was better in one-on-one drills as a blocker than anyone expected from him. Um, I still think that him as a blocking tight end is uh, let's not think that he's going to come in and be a great blocker,
And I don't
but
even
he
think a team that's going to draft him is going to want him to inline block a lot. There are some injury concerns for this prospect. I mean,
yeah,
he
there
only
are.
had 8 receptions. He only saw action in 4 games in the prior 2 years before 2024, where he kind of had the 1 year production.
Hmm.
So it's a 1 year production guy. The nice upside about him is he's 21 years old. A lot of room there. His athletic profile is off the hook. He's almost 82-inch wingspan. under a 4.7 40, 245 pounds, 6'4", and he did it all at the Senior Bowl. You really liked him. He stood out. He was the best tight end prospect there. And that's a big thing for the Seahawks. I mean, the Seahawks in the last 4 drafts have drafted 68% of their draft picks have been Senior Bowl prospects.
Yeah.
So they really pay attention to that. And so I'm sure they're interested, but with Klint Kubiak coming on board and really highlighting the need for a blocking tight end to be everyone, I'm not sure if this prospect gets drafted by the Seahawks.
Yeah. Agreed, especially with the medicals, but you know, uh this is a guy that you look at and because he's going to drop. He's going to be lower on the draft board because of his injury history, and lack of usage, prior to this last 1 year, um, than his talent indicates. And so this is a guy with late first round talent with a third round grade. And so you could do worse than getting a guy like that, especially if the team does. Let's say they cut Fant, they sign a guy in free agency uh, to be your number 2 with Barner, and then you draft a guy like Arroyo to be your third tight end. That you're gonna give him an opportunity to grow, develop, become a better blocker. Practice a lot, and then get him on the field later in the season. Like you, you could do far worse.
Well, and I'm going to say this too. You might have him as a third round grade. A lot of people do, but I think he's going to get pushed up into the second round just on that potential. And I think he's going
I
to
think he's
blow
going to
people out
blow
of the
up the
water
combine.
at the
Yeah.
combine, which, I think draft pundits, like us and that people that talk about the draft are more enamored with that than the actual scouts. I mean, the scouts are really going to go back to the film. They're going to say, okay, the combine matches up to what the film says. You add that to the information you got at the Senior Bowl, all that kind of stuff. So yes, he'll blow it up, and all the mock drafts out there will push him up. But in reality, I think you probably take a look at him back into the second round, first part of the third round. I agree with you there. It's just too many red flags on the medical,
Mm-hmm.
and he's scheme specific. He's not going to fit Klint Kubiak's system. I don't think. I think teams like that run offenses like Klint's will pass on this guy. I think, unless they have the luxury option, as you said, where they've got the position group handled and they've got extra picks, maybe an extra comp pick in the third round. They feel like they can go get a guy like this.
Yeah.
Mason Taylor, I think
Yeah.
is my next guy. I like him. He also went to the combine, son of former really legend defensive end Jason Taylor. Nice
And
prospect.
his
Again,
uncle is Zach Thomas too.
oh yeah,
Who's
that's
also
right.
who's also both
Hall of Famer.
his dad and his uncle are Hall of Famers. So
Yeah,
yeah, talk about
crazy.
pedigree.
The report, though, out of multiple people that were there, indicate that Taylor really struggled in blocking
Mm-hmm.
aspects at the position. And
Yep.
when you go look at the tape, that kind of was backed up. And so he's not ready made out of the gate blocker for you, but he does have, you've got to be able to be willing to learn and have the frame and muscle to be able to do it. I think the interview process for him will be key on that. And understanding where he's at with that. Is it a technique issue or is he just really bad at it? It could be a combination, obviously, but I like him as far as the pass, just kind of a potential to be a complete tight end, 6'5", 255, runs a 4.64 40. He's still 20 years old. He's got all that upside. I think he's going to end up going in the second round. Some people might value him higher than Aurora in the end. You're hearing a lot of buzz about Aurora right now because of the upside on athleticism and pass catching, but Mason Taylor's the safer pick.
He is much safer pick. He's he's the guy that um, it's cliche, but like he grew up around football and not just around high school football, but he grew up around pro football and Hall of Fame pro football guys. His
Pedigrees there.
Yeah, I mean he's really versatile. You can see him lined up, split out wide, into the slot, lined up in line, even pulled back into the backfield and running routes from there. Does a lot of stuff. Isn't the greatest athlete at the position. Guys like Arroyo gonna turn heads a little more in terms of that. But you know, earlier we are talking about what does the guy from Bowling Green really do well, Fannin. But um, with him, it's like what does Mason Taylor really do poorly? Okay, his blocking isn't great, but it's not as bad as a lot of the other guys here. His technique is decent, and he can get in and make some plays for you. As a
This is
blocker, I
the
mean,
this is
you're
to
not
me
gonna.
the first prospect that's going to be on Seattle's radar. That's going to be on potentially Seattle's draft board. Now, do they draft him? Do they place the priority with him, depending on other prospects that are available in their range? I
Mhm.
don't know that, but I would say that based on his pedigree, based on his background, based on how the interviews go and so forth, I think he's on their draft board, at least their early board at this point,
Yeah.
and a range where it makes sense to pick a player. If it's that 50th pick or they drop back a little bit, they pick up additional picks and they draft at 62 or 58 or whatever. Maybe that starts to make sense at that point to draft a tight end, especially if you can pick up an additional value. Um, the I think that really starts to make sense for Seattle is Gunnar Helm, the tight end from Texas, 6'5", 238. While he's undersized a little bit as far as the um, his weight, um, he does everything well. He's a willing blocker. He comes in and blocks right away. He's got the exceptional hands, great route runner, all that kind of stuff. And he's a player that I think you're going to get in the third round, maybe even fourth round if he drops a little bit. Um, and I think this is the range where it makes sense for Seattle. In fact, they've traditionally drafted players in the fourth round. If you take a look at the last couple of tight ends that they've brought in, I think this is a good spot for him.
Well, and to me, this is one of my favorite tight end prospects in the draft, just because, yeah, he's a little undersized at 238, so you're worried about him holding up as an inline
But
blocker. But
he's got the frame.
go look at his frame. This guy looks like a wide receiver. He's lean at 238. Like he can put on another 15 pounds easily, and just growing into his own body. I think this is a guy that's going to um, end up over time just developing into a really, really nice player. Um, and given, positional value and all of that, you're looking at a guy at late round 3, early round 4. I mean, that's where the Seahawks took Barner was, round 3. Um, and this is kind of a similar player. Barner was a little more ready-made as a blocker, but had needed to develop as a in the passing game quite a bit, which he did. Gunner is a little more ready-made as a chain mover, a receiver, a guy that can get open in zone coverage and that kind of stuff, and needs developing as a blocker. But he has all that potential there, all the athleticism that you need. I mean, just
And you go ahead.
as I say, he's just what the Seahawks would look for.
I agree. And I think that when you add the component of a fullback, now I think Seattle probably addresses fullback in free agency, but if they don't, they're looking for an H-back kind of a guy or a guy that's going to play tight end normally would come in and play fullback occasionally. This is a guy that could come in and do that.
Yep.
I think if Seattle decides to move on from Noah Fant and they don't really replace him in free agency, with a prospect that may not, make it out of camp or whatever. Maybe they add somebody, but it's not somebody you expect to be a long-term answer. A guy like this could be the pick because I think it pairs well with Barner's skill set, and it's kind of 1A 1B kind of a thing. And I think does Seattle value the super athletic playmaker at tight end versus steady as she goes, plug and play guys that can do everything really well? And if they value that more, this is a guy that's going to be on their radar.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean,
And he's
they
not
took,
the only one. There's a few here that we can talk
yeah,
about that are kind of
they,
in this ballpark.
it's weird because we don't really know that question, even though they drafted a tight end last year, because Barner, um, is not a, super dynamic, guy that's going to, just really push defenses to cover, him. But at the same time, they were trying to replace a guy like Will Disley, who's just a fantastic blocker. Um, and so is that an indication of what this coaching staff wants, or is that just an indication of what the roster needed at that moment? Um, and so we don't know what they're going to do as far as what type of player. Um, the next guy, Terrence Ferguson, out of Oregon, is he's an interesting guy. He's slower than a lot of the guys we've already talked about. He's bigger than a lot of the guys we've already talked about. And is only 22 and can come in and just um, he's got the prototypical size and to become a really nice blocker. Um, but
And he's
does he
already a
have?
decent run blocker. He's already there.
Oh yeah, but I mean, like even as a pass blocker, where you end up because of alignment concerns, he ends up having to take on a defensive end one on one. You don't want to do that too much with your tight ends, but I see the potential for him to actually grow into and be able to do that kind of thing. Um, and so
Yeah, I like him as a prospect, and I think he's slightly undervalued because he played on the West Coast. Yeah, Oregon was a prominent team this year, but nonetheless, I think overall prospects are generally they're not East Coast guys, right? So they get less
mhm,
eyes on them during the season. I like him a lot. I think he's going to be he's the perfect guy, I think, for a Klint Kubiak offense because he does everything really well,
he's the
and
closest
so
thing
he's
to
got
Barner in
a
this
low
draft.
he's got a high floor.
Hmm.
The ceiling's going to be what it is. He's 22 years old. He's not the youngest prospect, but he's not 24. He just does everything. He's well rounded already. Coming into the league, he's ready made. He's going to be able to play for you, get on the field right away. A guy that can line up opposite of Barner in a two tight end set and kind of give you everything you want out of the
Hmm.
position group. Now, if we do that and move on from Noah Fant, and you've got like a lower level veteran guy presence, on the your third tight end, a move like this makes sense. And especially if we draft the third wide receiver position on the Seahawks and you move on from Tyler Lockett, or maybe you rework Tyler Lockett and he comes back on a much lower deal. I think it makes it's going to impact your roster less to have Noah Fant gone. I think if you're still going to rely on your tight end position to move the chains a lot and be active in the passing game, maybe you still might draft this guy, but you're gonna that veteran you signed in free agency is going to be more of a starter level kind of a player.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if you expend a third round pick on a Terrence Ferguson. Maybe you wait until the fifth round. We'll talk about a few of those guys as well, but maybe you wait a little longer.
Yeah, kind of the opposite player of Ferguson would be Aronde Gadsden the second out of Syracuse. Um, this is a guy that
He's an interesting
runs.
prospect.
This is a guy that was a wide receiver. As of
He's got a wide receiver body.
2023.
Yeah.
Yeah. They
He's
moved
only
him inside.
236.
Yeah, he's smaller. but man, he runs well. Like he's a guy that will run away from linebackers. They just won't. They won't.
Four
Nobody will
five
have the speed
40.
to catch
Yeah,
to
he
stay
could
with him.
actually be in the 4.4s at the combine. If he
Uh,
is, this guy's going to
yep,
move up.
yep. And
I
I
believe.
could see his. Uh, I could see him, putting on, some body
Muscle.
mass and
Yes.
becoming a better blocker over time. Like I said, he's not that far removed from um, being a wide receiver, and he also missed a lot of 2023 with that Lisfranc injury, which is it's a broken bone, and it's really just really hard to return from because there's very little blood flow there, so things heal slowly. Um, and so yeah, I mean, he had came back for 2024 and had a good year, but did so without a lot of off season ahead of that, where he could truly develop his body and be ready to be a tight end instead of a wide receiver. So there's a lot of untapped potential there with him.
Yeah, 73 catches, 934 yards, and 7 touchdowns of production as a red shirt junior at Syracuse. Like
Hmm.
that's crazy. What was his quarterback's McCord? Is it McCord? Was his quarterback?
I think so.
Yeah, that's a big time relief valve. And a nice player. Yeah, I think he ends up being kind of a possession slot receiver in the NFL. Even if it's at the tight end spot, I think they move him around like a receiver. I don't know that it's going to be a fit for the Seahawks offense, but he is a weapon that if you had him, you certainly wouldn't be mad. I just don't know where you pick him in the draft. You know, I think if he blows up the combine, which I think he will, he's super athletic.
Hmm.
His agility is going to be off the chart. His straight line speed is going to flash. He's probably going to be the fastest tight end at the combine,
Oh, I
and
think
so
he's going to be, and it's not going to be close.
that's going to get you some looks. It just you've got to be a kind of a wide open offense, push the ball down the field. You know, Kansas City comes to mind
Hmm.
where this guy would be a good fit. Jake Brigenstool is a tight end prospect that I like that can do a lot of different things. 6'6", big frame, 240, 4740, little older prospect at almost 22 and a half years old. A shorter lengthwise kind of a guy, but does everything okay. Runs the verticals and seam routes really well, reliable hands, good football IQ, um, yards after the catch, does some inline stuff really well. He's going to be available in that 5th round range. This is where I think, Seattle could get value out of a player like this. Put some, have him in the system for a year, let him kind of mature. You move off of Noah Fant in 2026. This kind of a player would be like your third tight end in your offense that could move into maybe a number 2 tight end for you in a year or so.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that you watch his tape and you'll be underwhelmed by his blocking, but then you go look at him and he looks like a wide receiver. He doesn't look like a tight end. This is a guy that is relatively thin for a tight end, even though his weight's at 240. Um, for him to put on 10 pounds of weight between college and the pros is almost a guarantee because I just think he's going to fill out. And when he gets to 250 or 255, I think you're going to see a guy that can hold his own as a blocker better, especially with some improved technique. Where he puts his hands and stuff when he's trying to block is questionable. Clearly has not been coached well on those kind of things. Um, and yeah, I don't know. He's not as old. You're like, oh, he's an older prospect. He's 22 and a half. He's not
Yeah.
like 24, 25, like some of the guys in this draft class. So I think he's going to be well looked at because of his catch radius, his ability to, um, he uses his hands really well to make a catch away from his body. Does a good job of like boxing guys out like a basketball player on, you know, plays to the corner in the end zone, that kind of stuff. So he has some red zone potential. I think he is a guy that's going to end up having a decent NFL career. And yes, probably a fourth round pick range.
Yeah.
And you could do far worse, but in terms of that, but as you said, does he fit Seattle's scheme? Do his blocking limitations as a rookie suggest that they would go elsewhere? And I think maybe it does.
Yeah. Well, I would say if they're going to go elsewhere, this is one of my favorite prospects in the draft. Just from a value standpoint, a scheme fit, and where you're going to get him available, and that's Mitchell Evans, the tight end out of Notre Dame, 6'5",
Hmm.
260 pounds, runs a 4.6 or 4.7 640. He's not going to blow you away. 32-inch arms, 78-inch wingspan. Average old school tight end measurables, but he gives you the plus of being a real good pass catcher. So he's not going to drop a lot of balls that are thrown his way. He knows how to work, um, you know, out in space. He's going to be able to find those soft spots in the end zones. Good football IQ. Um, nice in blind blocker. He's already ready made. You're going to refine that, but he's already a willing blocker, already good at it. So he's going to come in, and at that spot in the draft where he's going to be available, I'm talking like fifth round. This is the type of prospect I think Seattle
Yeah,
values, and at that spot in the draft, it makes perfect sense to expend a draft pick on him. So I expect Seattle to draft in this range a tight end, and it wouldn't shock me at all if this is the prospect, Mitchell Evans.
I would agree. To me, like of all the guys that we've gone through and looked at and everything, this is the most likely Seahawk. He is really good as a blocker. You can plug him in there in the running game. I think he adds quite a bit. You could drop him in to the backfield as an H back. Maybe use him as a fullback. You can do a lot of different things with him. And he's not going to run away from guys. He's not the incredible like mismatch, but he catches the ball really well. Like just has the ability to adapt to poorly thrown passes and those kind of things, and just has a huge catch radius. So even though he won't necessarily get open down the field the way some of these other guys will, he's still a reliable receiver. And with the blocking being as developed as it is, I just think that this guy just has Seahawk written all over him.
I totally agree. I mean, a team that runs a lot of two tight end sets, 12 personnel, I think it aligns well with what Seattle wants to do with multiple tight ends on the field. He gives you that scheme diversity where you can move them all over the place. He blocks for you. He's a willing blocker. He blocks out in space well as well. So you're going to, if he's going to be out, moving out to block ahead for wide receivers, for example, he would do well there. In your outside stretch zone, he can get out in space for you. So to me, this is an ideal candidate and a good value at this spot in the draft. This is a candidate. There's a couple other guys as well that kind of fit this mold. So if they miss on this, there's a few other ones too.
Like Luke
Like
Lachey.
Luke Lachey. Yeah, I was
Yeah,
just going to
for
say that
Iowa.
tight end to Iowa, 6'6", 253, 4'7", 240. He's a little older prospect, 24 years old, but he's already got he's refined as a receiver. He understands defenses, where to be, where to get open, route running, catch radius, high pointing the ball, that kind of stuff. Son of Jim Lackey, all pro. Just a high caliber character guy as well. Workhorse mentality. Does everything for you on the football field. That's the type of player that Seattle is going to be very interested in. Is
Hmm.
a guy that fits your culture, Mike McDonald's culture, and
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a guy that they're going to be interested in.
He's a blue collar kind of tight end. He's not going to go out and demand the football as a receiver. He's, and be all cranky if he doesn't get the ball. He's just going to get in and work. And if that involves a lot of blocking and a lot of work, in the trenches and doing the dirty stuff, that's cool. And if it happens to be giving him opportunities to use his soft hands and his catch radius, to catch a touchdown, he's going to be just as happy. And yeah, this is a guy that I think that um, Seattle would love, just because he's look at his size. Like he's a bigger guy. He's like, and not only that, but he could probably add another 10 pounds. Like that's one of the things that I found really interesting about this year's draft class is these tight ends are like 250, but they're lean 250.
Yeah.
And this isn't 250 with with the stomach and all of that. No, these guys they have like wide receiver bodies, and this guy's 255 and looks like that. So I think you're going to end up with a guy that can be an inline blocker, that can be your lead blocker um, in um, in a running game and be really good at it. So uh,
Yeah.
yeah, he's another.
Interesting.
This guy and the guy from Notre Dame are like kind of the two guys that I'm like, okay,
I
let's get
agree.
one of those and I'll be happy.
I agree. There are a couple other prospects that I had to talk about. Jalen Conyers from Texas Tech, more of a receiving tight end prospect with a little bit of upside on the blocking stuff just because of his frame. And I like the length that he has. Kind of a late round guy. He's not as
Mhm.
developed in any one thing, but he's got that potential and the versatility that you like to see in a tight end. So if you're going to spend, the last pick of the draft or the second to the last pick, and you want a developmental prospect to come in and he does a lot of things well, he's probably going to make the roster. So he's going to be a special teams kind of a guy. This would be a good pick for that. And then Jackson Haas, the tight end out of Georgia Tech,
Mhm.
already, according to almost every report I've seen, is the best blocking tight end in the draft. Even though he's only 241 pounds, he's just got that tenacity and that willingness. He's a 24-year-old prospect, though, so he's way down in the seventh round range. But if you're really looking for somebody to be a good drive blocker, a guy that can come in and play fullback for you right away, a special teams guy, but developmental prospect on the other aspects of the tight end position, that's a guy you might look at.
Well, and kind of the another guy that's developmental prospect that I like is Molokai Mataveo out of UCLA. The guy's 6'6", 263 already. Um, and runs a 4.7
Mhm.
4.72 40. So he's not the fastest guy, but um that size, that length, he's only 21. But he just turned 21. Guy with great hands. He's kind of uh, built to be a chain mover, a guy who can line up all over the field, even at that size, being over 260, and be able to do all sorts of fun things. And unfortunately, his blocking isn't where you'd expect it to be for a guy his size. Like, I mean, it's one of the larger tight ends in this draft class,
I
and
liked him actually.
he's not a fantastic blocker, but obviously the talent's there. You look at well, why isn't he a fantastic blocker? Well, his technique's kind of crap, and he's
And that's the
clearly
thing with him,
not
right?
been
Because
coached.
he's kind of after the catch, he's kind of nasty. He looks for contact. He blows people over. He hits. He initiates contact. It's like he's got that mentality, that fierceness that you look at the warrior type stuff. But yeah, the technique is really raw there.
Yeah,
I like
it's
him.
how this made me like, if you got a guy that's this big, this talented, I know that they're like, oh, well, we can use him as a mismatch as a receiver, and he's going to be really productive. But to not develop his blocking skills and just his technique, like, you know, footwork and where you put your hands and not leaning, and the guy needs um, considerable like refinement in his technique. And I just like it seems like a waste for a college coaching staff not to develop those skills, but his tape makes it look like nobody tried. It's kind
Yeah.
of
No,
kind of a Jimmy Graham situation where he just no one ever asked him to, and so therefore he never did.
he's
Um,
just he's a football player, Keith. Like
he is.
he's a football player first and an athlete second. Like but he's got the athleticism, but he loves football, and these
Hmm.
are the type of prospects you kind of want as a priority guy, a priority free agent. If he doesn't get drafted, you've talked to his agent, you've talked to him, you let him know how much you want him, and if he doesn't, it doesn't work out, you sign him afterwards. um, because he does need some refinement. But his nickname's the Tower of Terror, for God's sakes, right? That's his
Yeah.
nickname. So you kind of you work with that, and you bring him on. He's the kind of warrior mentality guy, and if it doesn't work for him, on your roster in first year, you put him on the practice squad, you keep him around. He outworks everybody. He makes you bring him up a couple times during the year, and eventually works into that third tight end spot in year two. And who knows after that? I love that guy. I didn't write him on my list, but I looked at him. In fact, I did write him down actually, as being a kind of a priority free agent signing if he didn't go in the seventh round, or Seattle used its last pick in the seventh round there. I just really like the idea. And he wasn't horrible. Like, there may be draft boards where he's, fifth, sixth round kind of a guy, 41 catches,
Hmm.
506 yards at UCLA in his final season. That's not a small production, in college when you only play 12, 13 games.
Yeah.
So, you could do
I
worse.
see. I was thinking him as more of a fifth, sixth. I think he's got a right now I've got him initially as a 6th round grade. So you're like, um, priority free agent. I'm like, I think he's going to get drafted. I really do. I think um, he's going to end up as a draftable player and get himself drafted in part because he's only 21. So yeah, he needs a lot of
Yes.
refinement, but he's young. You
Yes.
have time to
And a
refine.
young 21 too. He just turned 21
Yeah.
last month.
So you're going to be able to slow play him a little bit if you need to, but he's a fantastic looking player, athlete. He's a guy that I would like to have in Seattle's roster. Kind of the
So
last one on my list too, I think.
yeah, me too. I mean, there's more obviously, but that's the ones we made time for. I think that what this tells me. Well, first of all, I do believe Seattle's going to be in the market for a tight end.
Yeah,
Now, are they gonna spend money in free agency or retain Noah Fant? That's going to be the question that's going to need to be answered first, and we'll know that within a month or 5 weeks. The I think the idea of drafting a guy though, because the position takes on a new level of importance in Kubiak's system versus Grubb, is that some of these guys that we've been talking about, I think in the fourth to sixth round range, just in the last 4 or 5 guys we talked about, one of those guys is going to get drafted by the Seahawks. I just feel that,
hmm
just based on my experience and long time, years covering this thing, that's where I think they end up getting a good value pick, and a guy that becomes your third tight end on the roster in year one, but has the opportunity to really make an impact later on. I think that's the way they go.
which is interesting because that's what I mean. Barnes was a little bit more refined as a blocker than we're kind of saying, and therefore went in the round 3. But um, he was the guy that was brought in to be the third tight end on the roster and then, developed beyond that. And he came in and almost instantly overtook Pharaoh Brown,
Yes.
and was a far better player. And, um, I think they're going to be kind of in that same market, right? So now you've got one of your two um, inline blocker, um, you know, 12 personnel guys that you need. You need another one, but you're going to draft a guy that can become that. And whether it's um, Lackey or Evans or um, Matavao, like it's going to be one of these guys, and to come in and just be that um, that road grader that you kind of need in front of a running game when you're doing a stretch zone. And I like the idea that the Seahawks are going to go young at this position. It's a position where you can go young at and not lose a lot. And so, um, given their salary cap constraints, to draft another rookie and put a you know Barnes out there, and then um, a Mitchell Evans on the other side of the line. Yeah, it's
Yes,
young. Two guys, both guys have 1 year experience combined in the pro level, but I think you could get a lot of production out of that despite not spending any money on it. So,
agreed. And that's why I think you do try to find a NFL ready guy. The Auroros and some of the other guys are not necessarily going to have an impact on an NFL roster in year one. They show really well at the Senior Bowl and so forth, but they're just not ready. I don't think. Maybe the back half of year one, but
mhm.
these other guys that do everything really well have been in the system for a while. Um, I think give you the opportunity to come in right away and have an impact. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Next show, we're going to turn our attention to wide receivers. That'll be an interesting show because I think Seattle's going to be in the market for one. It
I
wouldn't
think Seattle
shock me
might
if one
be
comes
in the
off the
market for
board
two.
early. Really?
I think
It
Seattle's
wouldn't
gonna be in the
shock
market.
me if Seattle comes off the board with one before round 3,
Yeah,
like with our second overall pick,
so
because
around
how
50.
yeah, because of how important a good, really good third wide receiver is. And I think they would want a guy that could come in and be the third wide receiver in year one. But you're
Hmm.
also hedging against DK Metcalf either moving on in free agency after 2025, or hedging against them not being able to work out a long term deal and having him traded or something like that. Um, so it'll be interesting. I think it's going to be a position that they draft, and they'll probably sign a guy in free agency um, that has experience in this system. I think, but I think they're going to spend a draft pick, and I think it's going to be higher than people realize.
Yeah,
And there's some good guys. It'll
there
be a fun
is.
show. It'll be a
It'll be
fun
a
show.
fun show. There's a lot of guys. Um, we're gonna have to speed things up in order to get through all of them because there's a lot of guys
Yeah,
to get through at wide receiver.
yeah. All right, let's get out of here. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, Keith. You can find Keith on Blue Sky at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. You've got it on your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, share it, like it, leave a comment, all that good stuff. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.